I want to welcome Agile XRM to the podcast. I've known the people at Agile XRM for the past 12 years. I've seen how their business process management tool can add massive value to complex organizational processes in sectors such as finance and government. If you have complex processes or a need for dialogues on the Power Platform or Dynamics 365, take a look at how this BPM tool can add value. You can find them at agilexrm.com or check out the show notes for more details. Welcome to the Power 365 show, where I interview staff at Microsoft across the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 technology stack. I hope you'll find this podcast educational and inspire you to do more with this great technology. Now, let's get on with the show. Today's guest is from Washington in the United States, and we're going to talk about field service. What's the state of play, where things are at now, and what is coming. He's a principal program product manager of Dynamics 365 Field Service at Microsoft. You can find links to his bio, LinkedIn, and anything else he's done in the digital domain in the show notes for this episode. Anything we discuss resources-wise will also be in those show notes. With that, Hector, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mark. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Good to have you on the show. We've, chatted a bit in the last month or so, especially since MVP Summit. But before we drill into field service, just tell us a bit about food, family, and fun for you. What do you do when you're not doing Microsoft?
What do I do when I'm not doing Microsoft? I mostly spend time with my 3.5-year-old, my wife, trying to survive the Washington State weather these days because it's way rainier than I would like it to be.
Wow.
Hopefully at some point we'll have some summer here. Who knows? And then I just like to go cycling and running and skiing in the winter. Mostly that's what I do. And read nonfiction. Nice.
When it comes to cycling, running, and skiing, you're in probably one of the perfect places on the planet.
Yes, when it's not raining, yes.
Yeah, when it's not raining. Totally. How have you found it moving post-COVID, kind of moving back into the office and getting back into, how are you balancing the work from home, work from office type, environment that we're all going through at the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in general, in Microsoft, we have a very hybrid approach where everybody have the opportunity to choose what fit for them. What works for me is I'm in the office 50% of the time. So, for example, I usually go Monday, Tuesday, Thursdays is my in-office, and I take the opportunity to do most of my one-on-ones with my directs, with my leaders and peers and things like that. So just I can get foster a little bit more like the people connection.
Nice.
And then my focus days tend to be days like Friday and Wednesday, which I take the opportunity to do research focus time or do interviews like this, customers that are remote, etc.
I like it. Tell us about field service. When somebody says, hey, you meet them socially, let's say, and so in other words, outside of Microsoft land, and somebody says, so they don't know what we do type thing. What when they say, what's this Dynamic 365 field service thing? How do you explain that in layman's terms?
Yeah, I'd say, have you ever seen a technician in your home or somewhere doing something? The answer is usually yes. Mm-hmm. And then they say well, how do you think that person got there? How do you think their work got defined? How do you think they're fixing the problem? And how do you think they're communicating back to you? Mm-hmm. And they was well, I may or may not heard about that. It's that's what field service does. Putting the right field engineering in the right place at the right time, fixing the right thing, and communicating with you as fast as possible.
Yeah, nice. How long's field service now been in the business? I was there when the announcement was, I was in Seattle at the time when the announcement of the acquisition of a range of tool sets, came in. I can't even remember the company now that was acquired. What was the name of the company? Field One, yeah. Were you part of Field One?
No. I actually joined. I am Microsoft born and raised, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've been in Microsoft for 8 years, and I was leading remote assist first. So field service has been in market, I think GA. I think this is the 6th or 7th year. Yeah. Don't quote me, but it's been a number of years. And then I've been mostly involved as a director of PM for field service in the last 2 years.
Gotcha. So it's a mature, established product now, in the portfolio. What's the state of play? If you were to give me, for somebody that's been in the channel a while, an update of where field service sits now, what it's, from a market dominance position, where's the white space, where's the opportunity, where's, because I always, the way I would talk about it is that, why Microsoft got into this space is that there was no real dominant player. Everybody was homegrown to the most part when they needed an application. If you're a service company that, maintained the lifts in a building or the escalators in a building, you would build an app, that at some point, because it wasn't kind of like a solution off the shelf. And of course, one of the biggest challenges anybody had with any solution was the mobility piece, right? We need a worker that can go on site. They're going to need certain tools. They're going to need certain inventory products to do the fix. They're going to do the maintenance for cycle, etc. And I say that's why Microsoft entered the space, because there was no clear dominant player. Now we've been in the space for a while. What's the landscape like in the market from your perspective? What do you look at? Where are we kind of positioned? How do we stand globally at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things to unpack. Let me talk about the market first, and then we'll talk about the competitive landscape.
Yeah,
I think from a market standpoint, I think we're seeing an explosion of use cases when it relates to what I broadly define not only field service, but like service and maintenance operations. And I think this is due to a myriad of factors, but I would say a few things. One, the digitalization of the front-end workers. More and more companies want to actually bring, like digital tools for the front-end workers. Like in the past, the typical flow will be like, I'll do pen and paper, or I'll do something, and then I go back to my home or to my desk, and I'll just fill all those things that I did. Now, people, like more and more as mobile phones become more powerful and cheaper, like that consumerization that we saw in the information worker in sales and marketing, et cetera, say like 10 years ago, we're seeing it now in the front-end workers, which I think is huge. The second trend I see is like the digitalization of the assets. But like we're going from this like system of record, traditional. First of all, we're going from sometimes asset records being in isolation. So maybe your ERP has some asset data, and then your service and maintenance has some asset data, your customers have some data. But like we're seeing this explosion of like all the assets getting together and really turning into something that they can connect or they can get signal from, and they can, you can really turn it into a digital twin. And I don't really like that word because it's so overused. But like, I think the audience will get my point. And I think the third trend is like the digitalization of the spaces itself, right? Like I think like I was in the IoT team for a long time before being in mixed reality. And for a while, we thought everything was going to be connected. And now we're seeing that there's a lot of already connected devices like cameras and phones, etc. They're actually giving you a lot of insights that you can get advantage from. So I think the explosion of these three things are making it so that the market is not field service anymore. Because we're seeing field service scenario on healthcare, on infrastructure, on banking, on finance, on what have you. So that would make it like super, super attractive, in my opinion. It's like we're trying to create the next suite of capabilities for the front-end worker, just as like, say, Office or Dynamics had it for the information worker in sales, marketing, customer service, etc. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
So that's one. And then I think from a competitor standpoint, it's a fascinating environment, because I think on the one hand, we have our, what I call, for the lack of a better term, the usual suspects, which is, Microsoft, Salesforce, IFS, Oracle, etc. Right? We're all trying to go at the space from a different angle. For us, it's all about like connected assets, people, and places, end to end, from back office to front office, etc. But we also have a lot of like really interesting ISVs and players who are not necessarily associated with, like, say, traditional field service, but they're coming to like fleet management, connected equipment, etc. For example, say Samsara, right? It's a super interesting ISV that is being up and coming more from the IoT space, but they're getting much more into the processes. So like that makes it like super interesting. And then of course you have like, like small companies, which the one is like, I think it's Upkeep. It's another one that we keep seeing, etc. So super, super, super fun place to be right now.
So what's happened in the last couple of years within the team, within the product, as in I had some feedback probably 6 months ago from the market that there didn't seem to be many new announcements coming out around field service. It was like last year seemed pretty quiet as a whole when we look at the release cycle, coming out of Microsoft. I know there've been some changes. What's your lens on this?
Yeah. So one of the things so when I took over field service, like in late 2020, one of the things I saw was capability wise, great, right? I can take so many capabilities. We've spent so much time in the first 4 or 5 years shipping all the features, right? Like we got into the Magic Quadrant, we got into like all those things. But then I thought, okay, our growth was incredible, right? In terms of exponential growth, number of new customers, pumping in. So what we really did last year was just like set the foundation to make sure that we continue to accelerate that growth. So a lot of the things that we've done last year are not like necessarily shiny things, but we prioritize, we've prioritized a lot of like the scale, the growth, etc. Even though, we've shipped all the customer engagement portal features, we've shipped a lot of the things in the new mobile app, we've shipped improvements in the work order form. But I would say we've actually been much more focused on making much better what we have than actually expanding a lot. I'll give you an example on the kind of growth that I'm talking about. 3 years ago, I would say we have a few tenants, some good amount, but not crazy, of people who use IoT in production, connected field service in production, right? And we have a few million assets connected, right? Right now, we're on path to make to 1 billion assets in field service.
1 billion.
Yes.
Wow.
And when we have several dozens of million connected devices in field service. So and these only happened in the last 2 to 3 years, right? So you can imagine the type of you have to really make sure that customers are happy with what they have and can scale to this kind of thing. So we've been spending a lot of time on this, like listening to customer feedback, etc. And it's also been forming kind of like our new holistic vision, which I was referring to a little bit, which is I think what we're going to be all about in the future is like more in linking the people, places, and things, right? Like, so how do we make sure that you have with field service, how do we make sure you have an environment when you can leverage, computer vision AI to be able to create a work order and also put yourself a HoloLens so you can do a spatial anchor and be able to diagnose the asset, but also have the best scheduling capabilities if you're in the back office, right? So today, as you know, right, it still takes a lot of work to put all these pieces together or some work. We actually want to make it much more adaptable and much more faster pace for our customers and partners. That's what we're all about.
Nice. I want to look at two kind of core areas of the system, one being the scheduling system that you just mentioned, and also then mobility. Are we at a type of a status now from a mobility that all the kind of use cases you've seen come in from the market that were addressed, or do you see you've still got a roadmap of work to do in the mobility space? How do you feel about the mobile experience now, and is it meeting all the market's needs predominantly?
So I think in terms of use cases, we're seeing more and more use cases every day. I was just talking to a company the other day that were using field service mobile for their doctors and nurses as they were doing, trips to the field in the middle of nowhere, and they wanted to report, hearing studies and things like that. So I never thought about that, and I never thought they would need offline, because that type of persona. So I think mobility in the frontline worker space never ceases to surprise me in that sense. I think specifically with field service mobile, our customers are taking our app now in production, especially the new app, the Power-based app, etc. They're taking our application to the extreme in a good way, right? They're pushing the envelope, and we're putting a lot of emphasis right now on like offline scenarios, but not offline like complete offline or complete online, but those edge cases. What happens when you go from 1 bar to 3 bars or 4 bars to 2 bars? All those things that make it super tricky. We hear the feedback loud and clear, and we're putting a lot of emphasis into that. But I truly believe, Mark, that in terms of like frontline worker scenarios, I think we have our job cut out for the next 10 years because it's going to continue to like push the envelope. Right now, for example, another key area of focus for now is like, okay, how do we bring together all these MR capabilities that have been very innovation focus for a little bit. Like, obviously, there's some big broader use and all that, but sometimes it would land in the innovation teams, or maybe I do it in a factory, or I do it in one particular geography, or one particular set of technician that has the willingness to pay for an expensive headset. One of the things we're thinking about is like, how do you actually democratize all of that so that every field service customer can instantly have MR capabilities?
Yeah.
Right. So that's where we're putting a lot of time into it.
So if you're thinking about that scenario, I take it you're not thinking about it from a headset perspective, but more whatever the mobile device that I have, I can, bring up the camera and go, okay, let's get the digital overlay of my physical world. That's phenomenal.
I mean, most people today use phones, right? And even in I think there's a market for headsets. The way I think about this is like 15 years ago, all we had was or 20 desktop PCs, right? And then we came some mobile PCs or mobile laptops, and they were very bulky. And then the portfolio started then we got the tablets, and then we got thinner, thinner computers and all those things. And then if you have an organization of 1,000 people, you're going to have a myriad of people. Some people will need a super, super powerful machine. Some people are going to use a tablet, whatever. So for me, head-mounted devices is just another form factor.
Yeah.
That is, it's going to be optimal for some workers. It's going to be optimal for other workers who won't be optimal, right? So a lot of our field technicians still have Class C devices today, right? So you tell them about going from a Class C device to put themselves like a RealWear, a HoloLens, or whatever, and that's a big leap, right? It's a big change. So we just need to make sure we democratize. Microsoft has always been about democratizing technology to people. If you really think about it, our trademark has always been take something that looks extremely complex and expensive, like for example databases, and then launch SQL and disrupt. Windows Server, Linux was like this. Then come Windows Server, boom, disrupt.
Yeah.
The Power Apps come to local development, Visual Studio. It's all trademarked over and over again. And this is what we want to do. The same thing in field service for the front-end worker technicians.
I like it. Looking at that other area, the whole scheduling system, it's an amazing tool and it's a complex thing to get right. What are you thinking about, and without any NDA stuff, roadmap future around your scheduling? What are you hearing perhaps even from the market or requests that people would like to see happen?
I think, the vision is to have, I think what we've seen right now is our experiences, and in general, the way the market has been thought about this has been very okay, you either do manual scheduling or you do assisted scheduling or you do automatic scheduling, right? Yeah. And those are few different experiences that are somehow connected, but they don't feel seamless. They don't feel like a slider that you can just you can choose depending on your context, right? And then I also think that sometimes the, optimizer, our optimization tools. And I think in general, optimization tools, I don't think they've been super user-friendly in general. But I think they've been very much okay, you really need to know what you're doing. And also sometimes the algorithm is not giving you back what you want. Why are you even optimizing like this? Therefore, then it creates this mistrust on the business persona who's doing this okay, I don't know why they did what you're doing. It's almost for example, think about Bing Maps. Now you trust Bing Maps on the traffic because there's been repeated times where they prove you that they can do it better than you. So we need to create the same type of trust, right, in the user of the optimized scheduling, knowing that sometimes it's a traditional user who doesn't want to use automation because they think that drag and dropping is better. So I would say two things that are top of mind for me in that area. Number one, making sure we make the experiences between manual, automated, and fully optimized, assisted and fully optimized, seamless into one single user experience, depending on your case. And then use much more suggestions, right? We notice that you're doing this. Do you want to do that? Another example I will give to your audience is think about Viva, if you ever use it, right? Viva gives you suggestions about your scheduling, and it gives you suggestions about blocking time. So we want to do something like that in scheduling, right? We want to give the dispatchers some suggestions. So that's one. And I think the other one is we just need to make optimization engines way simpler, right? Complicated in the back, in the mix, in the guts of it, but very simple to the user experience. It's most people, when you do AI, most people don't know if you're using AI or not. So we shouldn't just put technology in your face. We should just make it easy for you so that you can consume it. So those are my two priorities: seamless, a manual, assisted, fully automated, and also a much more easier user experience on the optimization side of things.
I like it. I like it. You've talked about some unique use cases that you're starting to see more and more. You talked about healthcare there. What are some of the other use cases that you're seeing grow in dominance? So not just not so much interested in the edge cases, the one-offs, but what are you seeing more prevalent, use cases for using Dynamics 365?
Yeah, I think for some of our more classic field service audience, this is going to be like, of course, Hector, but I'm just going to say it because those are the two canonical scenarios that we're seeing. They continue to work really well. Number one is like everything as a service, right? Rentals, product as a service, etc. Like contract-based maintenance and things like that. Outcome-based, super important. We're seeing it across the board, but especially discrete manufacturers. Everybody wants to get to that. I always say that sometimes if you think about at least the model that iPhone has in the States, right? Like right now they moved to a service. Like you pay a fee and you have a phone and you have an issue, you take it, you repair it, and every year you change it and you don't care. You're just paying $50 or whatever it is. I think people want to get to that golden standard for like not consumer devices, sometimes consumer devices, but also like, equipment, machinery, engines, you name it. That's number one. The other segment that we're seeing it's growing incredibly is smart buildings and facilities management. Like I think we're seeing a lot of traction across the board on, property managers, companies, rentals, the whole spectrum of what you would define facilities real estate, which is cross-industry, obviously. Everybody wants to have a better service and maintenance story. For example, a company like us, Microsoft, we've actually used, and it's public information, we use Dynamics to do our own facilities management, right?
Yes.
Better customer experience for our employees and better, optimized resources for them. And then we work well, obviously, with the traditional providers like CBRE and others to make sure that they maintain the business, etc. Great. A lot of companies like us are trying to do the same thing. And then there's like the traditional providers, right? And we just announced a partnership with CBRE, I think it was a couple months ago, on how we're helping them transform their platform for facilities management. So not every company that can afford or wants to do this, they can use CBRE to make it happen. And we're doing this across the board with a lot of companies, whether you're in rental properties, what have you. Super interesting use cases.
Yeah. What's next? What's you've talked about some of the things that you're passionate on. What else are you thinking about in the coming 12, 24 months, to land and market?
Yeah, a lot of exciting news that I can't really talk about just yet. But what I'll say is we're excited. It's never been a better time for Microsoft to be in field service. And what I would call we call this internally the physical operations, right? Because at the end of the day, it was all about, right? And you're going to see a lot of noise coming from what does it mean to do physical operations in the real world, in the industrial metaverse, like in every part that is being played. What does it mean for companies to transform their frontend workers? What does it mean to connect people, places, and things into a seamless SaaS experience? Because, for a while we've heard of all these things, but it's mostly been a past story, right? Yeah. We give you the Lego block and you build it and give you an ISV, etc. How do we actually democratize this in a business application, right? And if you think about it, for me, and this is my own metaphor, which is the CRM business was disrupted 20 years ago in the cloud. Before that, it was all kind of like legacy tools, and there's not like, and then the gold standard came, and everybody started doing CRM, right? I think that moment in field service and physical operations is about to come. Nice. Where we're going to start seeing a new paradigm or how people use tools, SaaS tools. And, I think in 10 years, what is CRM for sales and customer service, it was just like, of course we're doing this. I think the same thing in a few years is going to be for service operations and physical operations and asset management, etc.
I love it. Resources. Where can people go to find more resources around field service? Where do you direct people?
So I usually point them to we have a YouTube channel for field service. We also have an incredible amount of resourcing on Microsoft.com. I also will point them to the Ideas portal if they want to get feedback. We track that Ideas portal very carefully and we get tracked on that as well. And then the learning paths. There's learning paths in the Microsoft site. I think if you type we can give you the link so you can put it in the notes as well.
Totally.
If you tag the learning path for field streamers, you'll be able to get started on the various technologies.
I love it. Hector, thanks so much for coming on the Power 365 show.
Mark, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody for listening.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show from Microsoft, please message me on LinkedIn. If you want to be a supporter of the show, please check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. How will you create on the Power Platform today? Ciao.